First thing I want to do is remove the wheel. 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts. And remove the wheel. 14mm socket, remove both of these 2 bolts. Once that's broken free, I'm going to leave it in until I remove this one. Okay, take both of these off and set them aside safely, and then we can take the caliper off the bracket. I'm going to use a little pry bar and just gently pry it off. This one's in very poor condition. It's super rusty, so it's kind of stuck on there. Okay, I'm going to take it and put it up on top of the strut here. That way it's not putting any pressure on this brake hose. Now we can take off the pads. There we go. Now let's take this bracket off. So 19mm socket, I'm going to remove these 2 bolts that holds the caliper to the knuckle. That's one. Let's do the lower. Take both of them off and set the caliper bracket aside so we can clean it in a little bit. Now you can take the rotor off. If yours is stuck on there, you can hammer in between the studs. That usually breaks it free. Now with the caliper bracket, I'm going to take off these anti-rattle clips, set them aside, and I want to clean these areas here. I'm going to use a wire brush to start, and we'll see where that gets us. A lot of times you have to end up sanding things down. This doesn't look too bad, so I'll keep wire brushing. This one has a little bit more rust buildup than I'd like, so what I'm going to do is kind of grind it down just a little bit. Not too much, but that one's good. Now I'll spray it down a little bit, clean off the dust, get some brake grease, and just grease up these 2 areas. You don't need a lot, but what you want to do is cover it up so that it prevents any future rust from building up here. If you put too much, it'll actually squeeze out and get onto the rotor. So this side has a little too much. I'll wipe that off. Now you get your new anti-rattle clip, press it on, and make sure it goes all the way down into place. In the middle it has these 2 little tabs that lock on. You want to make sure that's pressed down. Perfect. Now let's do the same to this side. All right, now with both sides greased up, cleaned and greased up, I'm going to take off these slider pins here. Oh, this one looks like it's in somewhat poor condition. The boot seems to have not held up very well. So I'll inspect it, make sure it's not torn, which it's not, so I can reuse it. But I will clean up in there. I want to clean this pin off with a wire brush. I'm going to actually take it off to the wire wheel, but if all you have is a brush, then brush it off. I'll wipe it with some brake parts cleaner just to degrease it. But I definitely want to clean off all of this debris, and you want to make sure that that little groove in there is clean. That's where the boot seals up, and if it's dirty, water gets in there. So at this point, I'm also going to get a bore brush. I'm going to fill this hole here with some brake parts cleaner, and with my bore brush, I'm going to try to scrape off all the debris that's in there. Usually I don't do this if the grease is still good in there, but when the condition of the pin is like this, I like to clean the inside of that hole, and you can see all the junk that comes out. So we'll need to flush it. Now that it's clean, rinse it off. we'll let that dry for a little bit. In the meantime, I will go clean off this pin with a wire wheel. But like I said earlier, what you mainly want to focus on is this area here. Make sure that's clean. And if you have any rust buildup on the rest of the pin, go ahead and clean that off too. So I cleaned the pin. As you can see, I made sure that groove right there is nice and free of any rust, debris, or other buildup. And before I put the boot back, I want to clean the inside of it. The way you do that is you actually stick the rag that you're using right through it, pull it so that it's got quite a bit of rag stuffed in there, and then you just roll it. In my case, it's kind of dried up in there, so things are just crumbling right out. But now that I got it clean, I'm going to take my wire brush and then just scrape off the outer debris that's built up on there. I'm trying not to get it on my freshly greased area here. Now I'm just going to gently blow the hole out, make sure it's dry. Blow all the debris. Okay. Now I'm going to put some grease in there, and I'm going to make sure that I get it on the outside of this lip. That's where the boot rides, and doing that will ensure that the grease basically seals up this, this hole from this end. Now I'll take a little bit more grease, and it might sound like a lot, but remember, I cleaned out the hole completely. There is no grease in there whatsoever. So I like to put it inside of the boot because it has this accordion piece. It has this accordion looking piece here. The grease gets in there and it kind of acts as a reserve of grease for when the pin goes in. I'm just trying to push it in. And now lightly coat the pin with the grease and make sure that you get some in that ridge up there where the boot seals up. For the same exact reason, you don't want any water making its way in. Now slide this all the way in, push it, and as you can see there's some air stuck behind there, so I'm going to push it all the way. That usually gets the air squeezed out. Wipe off any excess. Make sure it's sealed up properly, which it is. The boot does not want to come off when I pull on it, so that's perfect. Now we'll do the same to the other side. Of this hub. This one's rusty, but it's not too bad. I just want to get it clean so that there's no debris, rust chunks, or any buildup on it. You want the new rotor to sit nice and flush. Now you'll see in the next shot, it's going to be a new hub. We're replacing this hub, but obviously you don't have to do that for just brakes. So for me, if I was not replacing it, right here would be clean enough. And then I would coat it with some anti-seize to prevent any further rust. Whether you have a new one or old one, you want to put some anti-seize on the surface of this hub. That's going to prevent any rust from building up in the future. And it'll prevent the rotor from getting stuck on there. Now I'm going to put my rotor on backwards just so that I can clean off the oil coating that it comes with from the factory. They do that so they can prevent rust while it's sitting on the shelf. You want to use some brake parts cleaner and wipe it off with a rag. Clean it off as best as you can. Now flip it over, install it the right way. Where is it? And let's clean off this side as well. You don't want any of this oil getting onto your brake pads. Now slide on your caliper bracket and let's reinstall the two bolts that hold it on. And I cleaned up the threads on them because someone had put grease all over them. You don't want any grease or anti-seize on these. If anything, you put thread locker, but either install them dry or with thread locker, but definitely do not lubricate them with anything. Snug these up and then we'll torque them to 129 foot-pounds. That's one. And that's two. Perfect. Now let's put on the brake pads. The little clip here goes on the bottom. And you're gonna have to press the pads in that way, but also in that way at the same time. There we go. They should slide in easily. If they don't, that means you still have rust buildup here. And if you have rust buildup on these two areas, it'll squeeze the pads together and you'll have braking issues because they won't be able to release properly. And squeeze this one in as well. Perfect. Now make sure they slide easily back and forth, which these do. All right. So before the caliper goes on, I'm going to put an old brake pad in because I need to push the piston back in, scrape off any of this debris so it doesn't get caught in the boot. And you can use a large C-clamp, whatever you have. Basically, this piston needs to go in. I have a special tool that does that for me, which is why I'm using this brake pad. Otherwise, the tool would just go right into the hole. So squeeze the caliper slowly, and it should go in. Now let's put the caliper back on and start in the two mounting bolts at the back. I'm going to snug those up, 14 millimeter for both of these, 20 foot-pounds for both of these bolts. Now let's get the wheel on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and then I'll torque them to 80 foot-pounds. All right.